Welcome to Sleepy Harbor. Tonight we are going to slow down together and spend some time inside one of the strangest journeys you take every single night, without ever quite watching it happen. The journey from being awake to being asleep. The descent. That soft, sliding stretch of time somewhere in the last 90 minutes before sleep, when the world you know quietly comes apart and something older and gentler takes its place. You do not need to know anything about the brain to listen. You do not need to understand the science or remember the names or follow along carefully. There is nothing to figure out here, nowhere else to be, nothing you have to do with any of this. You can simply let the words move past you like water under a dock. If you feel like it, you can leave a small note in the comments. What time it is where you are, and what the night looks like outside your window. A light still on across the street. Rain, maybe. The particular quiet of a house at this hour. It is a soft thing, knowing that somewhere out there other people are lying down in the dark at the very same moment, listening to the very same voice, all of us drifting toward the same place from 100 different rooms. So before we begin, take a slow, deep breath in through the nose gently and let it go even more slowly than you took it in. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been holding themselves all day. Let the bed take your full weight. You do not have to keep yourself together anymore tonight. Wherever you are, however you are lying, let yourself settle in. Thank you for being here, for joining us at Sleepy Harbor. Let us begin. Here is something most of us believe without ever once stopping to question it. We believe that sleep is a switch, that there is a moment, a clean, sharp line, where on one side you are awake and on the other side you are gone, out, asleep. We talk about it that way. We say we dropped off. We say we were out like a light, as if there were a little switch somewhere behind the eyes, and at some exact second it simply flips and the room goes dark inside, the same way a room goes dark when you reach over and turn off the lamp. But that is not what happens. That is not what happens at all. There is no switch. There never was. What there is, instead, is a slope. A long, gentle, gradual slope that you walk down a little at a time, and the walk takes much longer than you think, and you are awake for most of it without realizing how much of you has already begun to let go. Sleep does not arrive all at once. It comes the way evening comes, not in a single instant when the sun is suddenly gone, but in a slow lowering of the light, a deepening of the shadows under the trees, a cooling of the air, until at some point you look up and notice it is dark, though you could never name the exact minute it became so. That is the truth the rest of tonight is built on. You do not fall asleep the way you fall off a ledge. You descend, step by quiet step. And the descent is not a blank, it is not an empty hallway between two rooms. It is a place, a real place, with its own weather and its own rules, a stretch of time you pass through every night of your life and almost never remember, because the part of you that does the remembering is one of the first things to dim. Tonight we are going to walk down that slope together, slowly, the way you might walk down a path to the water at dusk in no hurry at all, stopping to notice everything. And we begin at the most surprising place of all. We begin with your hands and your feet. Because here is the first strange and lovely thing your body is doing right now, perhaps without your knowledge. To fall asleep, your body is warming your hands and your feet, warming them deliberately, sending warmth out to the very edges of you, to your fingertips and your toes, to the soles of your feet where they rest under the blanket. And this feels like it should be wrong. If someone asked you how to fall asleep faster, you would never say, warm up your feet. You would think that warmth keeps you alert. You would imagine that to drift off, you need to feel cool, settled, still. And yet the research says something almost backward from what we would guess. Warm hands and warm feet are one of the strongest signs that sleep is coming. In fact, and this is the part that catches people, warm hands and feet predict how quickly you will fall asleep better than your level of melatonin does. Better, even, than how sleepy you feel. Let that sit for a moment because it is a genuinely odd fact. You could ask someone how tired they are, and that would tell you less about when they will fall asleep than simply touching their feet and feeling whether they are warm. The body knows something the mind has not been told. There were researchers, two names worth keeping for a moment, Kreutzsch and Kayotchen, working in Switzerland, and they published this in the journal Nature back in 1999, and what they found was exactly this. The warmth at the edges of the body was the better signpost, not the sleepiness you report, not even the hormone we always credit with making us drowsy. The warm feet won. So why? Why on earth would warm feet be the thing that ushers you down into sleep? And here is where the whole picture opens up into something beautiful, once you see what your body is actually trying to do. Your body deep inside has a temperature it likes to keep, your core temperature, the warmth of your central self, the heat held in your chest and your belly and your brain. And to fall asleep, that core needs to cool. Just a little. The descent into sleep is, among other things, a cooling. The inner you needs to drop in temperature, and the brain reads that drop as a signal. It is time. The night has come. You may let go now. But how do you cool your core? You cannot simply will it down. The body has a clever, ancient trick for this, and the trick is your hands and your feet. Think of your skin out at the edges as a radiator. Think of an old house with hot water running through pipes in the walls, and the radiator under the window where the heat finally escapes into the room. To cool the water in the system, you open the radiator and let the warmth pour off into the air. Your body does precisely this. It opens the blood vessels in your hands and your feet. They widen, they relax. More warm blood flows out to the surface. And the heat from your core rises up through that blood and radiates off your skin into the cool air of the room. This widening of the vessels has a name, and we will say it gently and then let it go because you do not need to hold on to it. It is called distal vasodilation. Distal simply means far. The far parts of you, the parts farthest from your center. Vasodilation means the blood vessels opening wide. So distal vasodilation is just this, the far edges of you opening up to let the warmth escape. Your feet grow warm, your hands grow warm, precisely because they are doing the work of cooling everything else. They are the open windows of the house. The warmth you feel at your fingertips is heat leaving. It is your core getting ready for sleep. And so the paradox resolves itself into something almost tender. Your warm feet are not keeping you awake. Your warm feet are the very sign that the cooling has begun, that the body has opened its windows, that the descent is underway. The warmth at the edges is the cooling at the center, seen from the outside. The two things are one thing. Scientists who study this even have a way of measuring it. They look at the difference between how warm your hands and feet are compared to how warm your core and your chest are. The far parts against the near parts. They call it the distal proximal skin temperature gradient. Distal, again, the far, proximal, the near. A gradient, simply a difference between two things like the slope of a hill, warmer at one end and cooler at the other. When the far parts of you grow warm relative to the near parts, when your feet are toasty and your core is shedding its heat, that gradient is the truest sign that you are sliding towards sleep. It outperforms nearly everything else we know how to measure. The body, opening its hands to the dark, letting the warmth pour off into the night. And once you understand this, an old piece of bedtime wisdom suddenly makes perfect surprising sense: the warm bath. You have heard perhaps that a warm bath before bed helps you sleep. And on the surface, this seems to contradict everything we just said. If sleep needs a cooling core, why would you climb into hot water and warm yourself all over? But watch what the warm bath actually does in the hour or two after you step out of it. The hot water warms your skin, yes. It floods the surface of you with heat, and it opens all those vessels at the edges wide, and then you get out and you dry off, and you lie down. And now all those opened vessels, all that warmed skin, becomes one enormous radiator. The heat pours off you into the cooler air of the room, and because the bath opened the windows so wide, the cooling that follows is faster and deeper than it would have been otherwise. The warm bath does not warm you towards sleep. The warm bath cools you towards sleep afterward by tricking your body into flinging open all its windows at once. This is not folklore. People who study sleep gathered up all the careful experiments on this, a large review published by a researcher named Hag Hayek and his colleagues in 2019, and what they found, looking across all of it together, was that a warm bath taken an hour or two before bed really does help people fall asleep more quickly. The mechanism is exactly the radiator we have been describing. Warm the skin, open the windows, then let the core cool faster than it could on its own. A warm bath is a cooling, dressed up as a warming. The body is full of these gentle disguises. And how much cooling are we actually talking about? It is a small thing by the numbers. The drop in your core temperature as you descend into sleep is only about 3 or 4/10 of a single degree, not even half a degree, a change so slight you would never feel it as cold. If someone told you your temperature was about to drop by 3/10 of a degree, you would not expect to notice anything at all. And yet that whisper of a change, that small, deliberate lowering, is one of the great signals the body gives itself that the time for sleep has come. Such a tiny shift, such a large meaning. The descent is full of these enormous transitions carried on the smallest of physical changes, the way an entire evening can turn on the dimming of a single lamp. And here is perhaps the most beautiful part of all of this, the part that ties the body and the brain together into a single sleeping whole. There is a place deep in the center of your brain that controls this cooling. It sits in a region called the hypothalamus, a small, ancient, vital piece of the brain that quietly manages so much of what keeps you alive: your temperature, your hunger, your thirst, the great unspoken housekeeping of being a living thing. And within the hypothalamus there is a smaller area still called the pre-optic area. You do not need to remember the name. What matters is what lives there. In that small place are neurons, brain cells, that are warm, sensitive. They feel heat. And when they sense that the body is warm, they trigger the heat to be released. They open those windows at the edges. They begin the cooling. That is one of their jobs. But here is the wonder of it. Those very same cells in that very same small place, the cells that trigger the cooling, are also the cells that promote sleep. They do both. The job of shedding heat and the job of bringing on sleep are not handled by two separate systems that happen to cooperate. They are tangled together in the same neighborhood of the brain, in the same handful of cells, sharing the same small piece of ground. Think about what that means. In the architecture of your own head, cooling down and falling asleep are not two ideas that the body has learned to connect. They are nearly the same act, performed by the same hands. The part of you that lets the warmth go is the part of you that lets the waking go. They live together, they work together. When that small place in the center of your brain begins to cool you, it is, in the very same motion, beginning to put you to sleep. The warming of your feet, the opening of the windows, the slow shedding of 3/10 of a degree, and the first soft tug of drowsiness. All of it traced back to one quiet room in the middle of your mind, doing two things that are, underneath, one thing. And so the descent begins not with a switch, not with a sudden dark, but with this: a warmth spreading to your hands and your feet, a small cooling at your center, a single set of cells in the deep middle of your brain, easing you toward the edge. Your body has already begun the journey. It began perhaps while you were still reading, still scrolling, still telling yourself you were wide awake. The feet grow warm. The core lets go of its little measure of heat. The windows open onto the night. And the first step down the slope is taken before you ever know you have left the top. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath in through the nose and let it go gently, even more slowly than before. Feel, if you can, the warmth at your hands and your feet right now. That quiet warmth that is, even as we speak, the sign of your own core beginning to cool. Your own body opening its windows to the dark. There is nothing to do about it. Nothing to fix. Nothing to hurry. Your body knows this path. It has walked it every night of your life, and it will walk it again tonight, whether you watch or not. You can simply let it carry you. Notice how the bed holds you. Notice the small sounds of the room and how they are already beginning to soften and recede, the way the far shore softens as the light goes. And when you are ready, in no hurry at all, we will continue down the slope together. Because the cooling we have followed so far is only one of the two great signals the body uses to find its way into sleep. The warmth at your edges, the cooling at your core. That is one current carrying you down. But there is another. There is a quiet arithmetic happening in your brain, a slow weighing of two opposing forces. And the moment those two forces tip into balance is the moment a kind of gate swings open and the night is allowed in. We have followed the warmth. Now let us follow the pressure, the slow, day-long building of sleepiness itself, and the fading of the signal that has been keeping you awake since morning. For there are two great hands at work on you tonight, one pressing you down towards sleep, the other holding you up toward waking. And the whole long story of falling asleep is the story of which hand, at last, lets go. I'm happy to help with this sleep narration continuation. Let me write the next section, picking up seamlessly and covering this part's beats. Welcome to Sleepy Harbor. Before we go any further down, let us pause and remember why you are here. You came to rest, not to study, not to remember, not to achieve anything at all. So let everything that follows simply wash over you like the sound of water against a hull in the dark. You do not need to know a single thing about the brain or the body to let these words carry you to sleep. There is nothing to figure out tonight, nowhere else to be. And if your mind wanders off somewhere in the middle of a sentence, that is not a failure. That is the tide doing exactly what it should. Wherever you are, whatever hour glows on the clock beside you, feel free to leave a quiet word below and tell us what time it is in your corner of the world and where you are listening from. We like to imagine the harbor full of small lit windows all over the earth, all of us drifting down together. And now take one slow, deep breath. Let it fill you, hold it for just a moment, and let it out longer than you took it in. Good. Thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Harbor. Let us begin. There is a story we tell ourselves about sleep, and it is almost entirely wrong. We picture it as a switch. One moment you are awake, sitting up, thinking your thoughts. The next, the switch flips, and you are simply gone, dropped into nothing until morning lifts you out again. Click off, click on. That is how it feels from the inside, and so that is how we imagine it. But that is not what happens, not even close. There is no switch. There is no single moment where waking ends and sleep begins. What there is instead is a slope, a long, gentle, graded descent, more like wading out into dark water than flipping a switch. The shore drops away beneath your feet by inches. First, the water is at your ankles, then your knees, then your waist, and somewhere out there, without your ever quite noticing the step that took you under, the water closes softly over your head. You do not fall asleep. You go down into it slowly by degrees, and the going down is itself a place, a real country with its own weather and its own rules that you pass through every single night and almost never remember. Tonight we are going to walk that slope together, very slowly, all the way down to the edge, and the first thing waiting for us there is a small, strange secret your body has been keeping from you. Here is the secret. To fall asleep, your body warms its hands and its feet. That sounds backwards, doesn't it? You might think that to drift off you would need to cool down, all over, to feel a kind of chill settle in. But it is the opposite at the edges. The single best sign that you are about to fall asleep, better than how heavy your eyelids feel, better even than the level of the sleep hormone in your blood, is warm hands and warm feet. Researchers found this and could scarcely believe it themselves. Two scientists in Switzerland, Kreutzsch and Kayochin, measured all of it carefully: the warmth of the skin, the level of melatonin, how sleepy people said they felt. And then they watched to see which of these things best predicted the moment sleep arrived. And the winner, the clearest signal of all, was the warmth flooding into the hands and feet. Not the sleepiness you feel, not the hormone rising in the dark, the warmth at your edges. Feel that for a moment. Even now, the warmth gathering quietly in your fingers, in your toes, beneath the blanket. That warmth is not a small comfort beside the point. That warmth is the point. It is the doorway itself, beginning to open. But why? Why would warm hands and feet be the thing that ushers you down into sleep? The answer is one of the loveliest pieces of plumbing in the whole body. And once you understand it, you will never feel a warm foot under the covers the same way again. It comes down to this: to fall asleep, your core must cool. The deep middle of you, and the warmth around your heart and your belly, has to drop just slightly. And the way the body lowers that deep inner temperature is by opening the blood vessels at the very surface of the skin out at the far edges in the hands and the feet. The scientists call this distal vasodilation. Distal simply meaning the parts of you farthest from the center, your hands and your feet, and vasodilation meaning the small vessels there widening, opening up. When those vessels at your edges open wide, warm blood from the deep core comes rushing out to the surface of your skin. And there, at the surface, all that warmth radiates away into the cool air of the room. Your hands and feet grow warm precisely because they have become the open windows through which the heat of your core is escaping into the dark. So picture it. Picture your body as a warm house at the end of a long day, and the time has come to settle it for the night. To cool the rooms, the house opens its windows. The warmth that has gathered all day pours out through those open windows into the cool evening, and slowly, room by room, the house grows quiet and cool and ready for rest. Your hands and your feet are the windows. The warmth you feel in them right now is the warmth of the whole house, letting go of the day. And the deep middle of you, the part that matters most for sleep, is cooling by the smallest degree, the way the heart of a house cools once its windows are thrown open to the night air. There is a name scientists give to the difference between the warmth at your edges and the warmth at your center. They call it the gradient, the distal proximal skin temperature gradient. But you do not need the name. You need only the feeling. Warm edges, cooling center, windows open, the house growing still. And here is where the secret becomes something you can actually use, something to carry into the harbor with you. You know the deep, drowsy heaviness that comes after a warm bath in the evening. The way you can almost feel yourself melting toward the pillow afterward. For years, people assumed a warm bath relaxes the muscles, and so it does, a little. But the real reason runs deeper, and it is the very same reason we have been following. When you sink into warm water, the vessels at the surface of your skin open wide, and when you step out into the cooler air of the room, all those open vessels do their work. They pour the heat away, and your core temperature, an hour or two later, drops lower than it would have otherwise. The warm bath, paradoxically, cools you. It throws your windows open. Scientists gathered up all the careful studies on this. A researcher named Hag Hayek and his colleagues pulled them all together in a great review. And they found the same thing again and again. A warm bath, taken an hour or two before bed, helps people fall asleep faster. Not because it warmed them, because in the end, it cooled them. The warmth was only the body opening its windows. And the drop that follows, that gentle fall of the core by perhaps 3 or 4/10 of a single degree, that small, quiet cooling is one of the surest tides that carries a person down into sleep. 3/10 of a degree, it is almost nothing. You would never feel it as a chill, and yet that whisper of cooling deep in the core of you is enough to tip the whole vast machinery of the brain toward rest. Which raises the question, how would the brain even know? How does a sleeping mind sense the temperature of the body it lives in and decide, on the strength of less than half a degree, that now, at last, it is time to go down? The answer lies in a tiny region tucked deep in the base of the brain, in a structure called the hypothalamus, in a small patch of it with a quiet name, the preoptic area. And here, in this one small patch of tissue, something remarkable is folded together. The neurons that sense heat and trigger the body to shed it, and the neurons that promote sleep itself, live side by side. They share the same ground, the same small neighborhood of the brain that says it is time to cool down, also says it is time to sleep. They are not two separate decisions wired together by some long chain of messengers. They are neighbors. They share a wall. Thermoregulation and sleep, the dropping of the body's heat and the closing of the day, are written into the very same square of neural earth. So when your core cools by that whisper of a degree, the message does not have far to travel. It is already home. The very cells that felt the cooling are leaning across to wake the cells that bring the sleep, cool the house, and the house puts itself to bed. And the hand that turns down the heat and the hand that turns out the light belong, it turns out, to the same quiet keeper, working alone in one small room at the base of everything you are. So let us pause here for a moment. There is no hurry at all. We have followed the warmth out to your hands and your feet, and we have followed the cool that it leaves behind in the deep center of you. We have opened the windows of the house and felt it begin to still. Take a slow, deep breath now, the way we did at the beginning. Draw it in gently, and let it go even more slowly, longer than you took it in, like a tide drawing back from a quiet shore. Notice, if you can, the warmth still resting in your fingers and your toes, that soft warmth that is the sign of everything working exactly as it should, your own body opening its own windows in its own time. And notice too the bed beneath you holding all of your weight so that you do not have to hold any of it yourself. There is nothing for you to do here, nothing to carry. The keeper at the base of your brain is already at work, turning things down one small dial at a time. And when you are ready, in no hurry at all, We will go on down the slope together and follow the second of the two great currents that are carrying you, this very moment, gently out toward the dark water and the sleep that waits beneath it. There are two currents carrying you towards sleep tonight, and we have spent some time with the first one, the thermal current, the warmth flowing outward, the cooling at the core. Now let us turn our attention gently to the second. It runs alongside the first, braided with it, invisible but just as real. And to understand it, we need to go back to something that began the moment you woke up this morning. The moment you opened your eyes today, a quiet accumulation began. You cannot feel it happening. There is no sensation, no signal, no weight you can name. But all through the waking hours, through your morning and your afternoon and your evening, your brain has been generating a molecule called adenosine. Simply, adenosine is a byproduct of the brain's work. Neurons use energy to think and perceive and feel and remember, and as they use that energy, adenosine builds up around them like the aftermath of a long day's labor. Slowly, steadily, unremarkably, hour by hour. And the longer you have been awake, the more of it there is. Adenosine matters because the brain has receptors, tiny docking stations, you might imagine them, that adenosine fits into. And when adenosine fits into those docking stations, the whole system receives a signal. This brain has been working for a long time. The signal produces what we simply know as sleepiness, that heavy feeling in the afternoon, the way your thoughts slow and thicken after a long day. That is adenosine at work, filling its docks, slowing the machinery down, insisting in its quiet chemical way that rest is owed. Scientists call this process S, where the S stands for sleep. It is the homeostatic side of sleep's mathematics, the pressure that builds with every hour you spend awake, the debt accumulating in real time, waiting to be paid. This is, incidentally, how caffeine works. Not by adding energy, not by giving you something extra. Caffeine fits into those same adenosine docking stations. It has the right shape to slip into the lock, but it does not transmit the sleep signal. It simply occupies the dock and blocks the adenosine from doing so. The tiredness is still there underneath, the adenosine still present and still accumulating, but the signal cannot reach you. When the caffeine clears, all the adenosine that had been quietly waiting floods in at once. That is the crash. It was not manufactured. It was there all along, patient and chemical, held back by a borrowed key. By this hour tonight, your adenosine levels are high. The pressure has been building since morning. Process S has done its work. But here is the thing that Alexander Borbély, a Swiss sleep researcher, who in 1982 set down what became one of the most enduring models in sleep science, understood so clearly. Process S alone does not determine when you fall asleep. If it did, you would simply crash whenever the pressure reached a certain peak, regardless of what time of day it happened to be. But that is not how it works. There is a second process running alongside it, in an entirely different register, governed by an entirely different system. Borbély called it Process C, where the C stands for circadian. The circadian process is not about accumulation. It does not build across the day. It is a rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle of alerting and quieting, driven by an astonishing small structure in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, tucked just above where the two optic nerves cross at the base of your brain, is the master clock. It is about the size of a grain of rice, and it has been keeping time for you since before you were born. Throughout the day, as light falls on your retinas, information travels to this tiny clock, and it maintains its rhythm, a rhythm of biological alertness that rises through the morning, holds steady through the afternoon, and then, in the evening, begins to withdraw its signal, to relax its grip, to step back. You fall asleep in Borbély's model when these two processes align, when the sleep pressure from adenosine has climbed high enough and when the circadian alerting signal from the suprachiasmatic nucleus has drawn back far enough. When those two things coincide, the sleep gate opens. That is the elegant simplicity of it. Not one force, but two working on independent timescales, meeting in the evening in a convergence that your body recognizes as the right moment. Miss that window, stay up past it, or try to sleep before it arrives. And the gate feels locked. The pressure and the clock are not yet in agreement. And woven into the circadian process, arriving a little before the gate opens, is the third player, melatonin. Let us be careful here, because melatonin is widely misunderstood. It is commonly described as a sleep hormone, as though swallowing a tablet of it is like taking a small dose of unconsciousness. It is not. Melatonin does not make you sleep. It is a timing signal, a biological announcement, something closer to a flag being raised in the dark than to a drug being administered. Here is what it actually does. The pineal gland, a small pine cone-shaped structure deep in the brain that the philosopher René Descartes once believed was the seat of the soul, begins secreting melatonin in response to the dimming of light. As evening comes and the light fades, the suprachiasmatic nucleus sends a message through a long relay of neurons that eventually reaches the pineal gland and says, simply, begin. And the pineal gland does. It begins producing melatonin and releasing it into the bloodstream. Not to induce sleep directly, but to tell the whole system, every cell, every organ, every region of the brain, that biological night has arrived, that darkness is here, that it is, in the body's ancient reckoning, time. The point at which melatonin concentration in the blood first begins to rise measurably in dim light is called the dim light melatonin onset, the DLMO. Sleep researchers use it as a precise, reproducible biomarker, a way of measuring where your body believes it is in its day. The DLMO typically occurs roughly 2 hours before your habitual sleep time, not 2 hours after you've gotten into bed, 2 hours before you would naturally fall asleep, which means that as you read or watched something this evening, the melatonin was already rising, the flag was already being raised. The announcement had already gone out through your bloodstream long before you decided that tonight it was time to lie down. What melatonin actually does in that announcement is quiet the alerting signal from the circadian clock, from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It does not create sleepiness in the way adenosine does. Instead, it removes one of the main things that was keeping you alert. It lowers the circadian resistance, you might say, allowing the homeostatic pressure that adenosine has been building all day to finally win. The two processes converge, the gate swings open. It is not a sedative. It is a doorkeeper standing aside. All of this, the adenosine's accumulated weight, the circadian clock's evening withdrawal, the melatonin's quiet broadcast through the dark bloodstream is why the 90 minutes before sleep feel the way they do. Heavier, slower, less interested in the bright details of things. Your body is not failing you. Your brain is not becoming less capable. Every one of those feelings is purposeful, the result of systems working precisely as they evolved to work, drawing you toward the edge with a combination of chemical weight and circadian permission. And now, once those conditions are met, the brain begins its actual passage. Let us follow it. Mary Carskadden and William Dement, two of the most foundational figures in modern sleep science, spent decades mapping what happens when sleep begins. One of the things they established is that in healthy adults, the time between lying down in the dark and the first measurable signs of sleep, what researchers call sleep latency, is typically somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, Not instantaneous, not an hour. A middle range, 10 to 20 minutes, that reflects the quiet work of all those systems we have been describing, completing their convergence. Less than 5 minutes, and it suggests something worth paying attention to. A brain so exhausted, so deep in sleep debt, that it seizes the opportunity almost before it is offered. More than 30 minutes, and it may signal a system in some kind of friction with itself. An alerting response that is not releasing, a body that is not yet trusting the night. But 10 to 20 minutes is the comfortable middle ground, the unhurried descent, the human average. What is happening in those 10 to 20 minutes is not waiting. It is activity, purposeful, measurable, extraordinary activity in slowing down. We can trace it in the electricity of the brain. For decades, scientists have placed small electrodes on the scalp and read the brain's faint electrical rhythms, a technology called electroencephalography, or EEG. And what they find tells a story. During active waking thought, the brain produces what are called beta waves. Beta waves are fast, somewhere between 13 and 30 cycles per second, which scientists measure in hertz, 13 to 30 hertz. Think of a busy city intersection, everyone moving in different directions, the signal fast and varied and without obvious pattern. That is the electrical texture of a thinking brain, each neuron firing somewhat independently of its neighbors, producing that rapid, desynchronized hum that is the signature of alert, engaged, active cognition. Now close your eyes, lie down, let your thoughts soften. The beta gives way to alpha. Alpha waves are slower, 8 to 12 cycles per second, 8 to 12 hertz. If beta is a busy intersection, alpha is more like a neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, quieter, more rhythmic, less urgent. Alpha tends to appear when you are relaxed and resting with your eyes closed, not actively processing anything, not particularly vigilant. It is the brain's resting idle, the pattern of a mind that has disengaged from the world, but has not yet left it. And then something else begins to happen. As the descent continues, the alpha itself begins to thin. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine, which sets the official standards by which sleep researchers around the world score their recordings, marks the beginning of stage N1, the first stage of sleep, at the moment when alpha activity drops below 50% of a recording epoch, replaced by something slower still. Theta waves, 4 to 7 hertz, 4 to 7 cycles per second. If alpha was a neighborhood on a Sunday, theta is that same neighborhood at 2 in the morning. Barely a sound. One window lit somewhere in the middle distance. The long, slow breathing of a world almost stopped. Theta is significant because it represents something that is happening not just in frequency but in architecture. As the brain slows toward theta, something is changing at the level of individual neurons. Instead of each neuron firing somewhat independently, each doing its own thing at its own moment, populations of neurons begin to synchronize, to fire together, to move in rhythm. It is the difference between a crowd in which everyone is talking at once and a choir that has found its note. Not louder, quieter actually, but organized, coherent. Slower than the chatter, but together. The electrical signature of that togetherness is what we read as theta on the EEG trace, and it is one of the most beautiful things, if you can feel your way to seeing it that way, that happens in your brain every single night. The brain is not losing power as it slows, it is reorganizing, moving from a mode built for taking in the world and responding to it towards something else, a mode we do not yet have a complete language for because it does not map onto any normal category of experience. Sleep is not the absence of activity, it is a different kind of activity with a different kind of rhythm. And much of that reorganization is happening in a structure we have not yet spent time with tonight, one that is, in many ways, the gatekeeper of the whole transition. The thalamus. The thalamus sits near the center of the brain, roughly at the level of your ears if you drew a line through the skull. It is shaped somewhat like a walnut, divided into two lobes, and it connects to almost every part of the cortex, the wrinkled outer layer of the brain that handles most of what we think of as thinking, perceiving, and being conscious. During wakefulness, the thalamus acts as a relay station. Every signal coming in from your sensor, the sounds you are hearing, the dim light reaching your closed eyelids, the feeling of the mattress under your shoulders, travels first through the thalamus before it reaches the cortex. The thalamus receives and routes and amplifies in a mode that sleep scientists call tonic relay mode. It is faithful, it is accurate, it passes along the world as it arrives. But as sleep approaches, the thalamus switches modes. The same structure in response to the same cascade of signals we have been tracing, the adenosine, the circadian permission, the melatonin, the cooling core, begins to operate differently. It switches from tonic relay mode into what is called burst mode, and in burst mode it does something extraordinary. It stops faithfully relaying the outside world to the cortex, and instead begins generating its own rhythmic bursts of activity, internal signals that have nothing to do with what is coming in through your ears or your skin or your eyes. In doing so, it effectively closes a curtain. The world is still out there, of course. Sounds are still reaching your ears. Touch is still reaching your skin. But the relay station is no longer passing those signals along. It has turned inward, generating its own rhythm, leaving the cortex increasingly disconnected from the world it was, moments ago, faithfully tracking. This is the subjective experience of the lights dimming, sounds becoming distant. The sense that the room is softening around you, that is not your hearing failing, that is the thalamus deliberately and specifically drawing the curtain, tuning out the external world so that a different kind of inner processing can begin. And as the thalamus does this, as it transitions, it leaves its signature on the EEG in the form of structures that sleep researchers can identify precisely. At the border between N1 and the next stage, N2, slightly deeper, characteristic patterns appear. Brief bursts of faster activity, 11 to 16 Hz, lasting only a second or two. These are sleep spindles generated by the thalamus itself, that distinctive, rapid little tremor that marks the sleeping brain as different from anything that came before. And alongside them, occasionally, large, slow waves called K-complexes. A sudden spike followed by a slower trough, a big biphasic wave that appears somewhat suddenly and is thought to represent the cortex responding to the thalamus's new rhythm, a moment of synchronized response across a wide swathe of neural tissue. The thalamus is no longer relaying the world, it is composing its own score. And the cortex, slowly, is beginning to listen to it. Your eyes know about this too. Throughout wakefulness, your eyes move in quick, purposeful ways. Even when you are not looking at anything in particular, they make small, rapid movements, tracking and adjusting. But as you enter the descent, as alpha softens into theta, and the thalamus begins to draw its curtain, your eye movements change. They become slow, rolling, involuntary. Long, gentle oscillations back and forth, the eyes drifting rather than tracking. Sleep researchers call these slow eye movements SEMs, and they are one of the clearest behavioral signs that a person is entering N1, that the waking vigilance that kept the eyes sharp and purposeful has begun to ease. If you have ever watched someone falling asleep beside you, you may have noticed the eyes growing heavy, the lids descending, and beneath them a faint rolling motion. That is what you were seeing. The thalamus pulling the curtain, the eyes following it down, and the rest of the body follows too in its own way. Muscle tone, This baseline level of tension that your muscles maintain even when you are not consciously contracting them, the slight readiness that keeps your posture and holds your jaw and supports your neck, begins to decline. Not collapse, not yet, but ease, measurably ease. If you were recording the electrical activity in your muscles, an electromyogram, an EMG, you would see the signal diminishing, the baseline dropping, the muscles releasing their chronic background vigilance, letting go of the job of being ready. Your jaw unclenches slightly, your shoulders soften, your hands open. Not because you decided to do any of those things, because the system that was holding the tension has been given permission to stand down. The autonomic nervous system is shifting too. The branch that governs alertness and readiness, the sympathetic nervous system, sometimes described simply as the fight or flight system, has been your companion all day, maintaining your heart rate and your blood pressure and the 1,000 small adjustments that keep a waking body in the world. Now, through the descent, it begins to yield. The parasympathetic nervous system at the rest and digest branch, the one that governs recovery and ease, begins to rise in relative dominance. Your heart rate slows, your breathing deepens and then slows as well. The rhythm of your heartbeat even changes in subtle ways, becoming more variable, more relaxed, less tightly regulated. And sleep researchers measuring heart rate variability can detect this shift before the EEG even registers the first signs of sleep. The body, in that sense, knows it is going to sleep before the brain officially declares it. This is one of the things that makes the sleep onset period so extraordinary to contemplate. It is not a single event happening in a single place. It is a convergence across all of your systems at once. The thermal shift we traced earlier, the chemical weight of adenosine, the circadian clock standing aside, the thalamus turning inward, the muscles releasing, the heart slowing, the eyes beginning their long rolling drift. All of it moving in the same direction at the same moment, each thread contributing to a single passage, a descent so coordinated it is almost like watching a tide go out, the whole shoreline withdrawing at once, quietly, irreversibly, toward the dark water. Let us pause here. There is no need to hold on to any of it. The systems are doing what they know. Just let your breath be slow for a moment. Let the air come in without effort and leave without resistance. Notice your hands, whether there is any warmth still resting in them or any softening in the muscles of your face. Notice the weight of your body, all of it given over to the surface beneath you, not 1 ounce held up by your own effort. There is something old and reliable happening here. These systems have done this 10 of thousands of times before tonight, since the very beginning of your life, and they will do it again. You are in good hands. Your own hands, it turns out, though they are working at a level below your choosing. Take one slow breath in and let it go. And when you feel ready, there is no hurry, we will continue down into the stranger country that waits just below this. There is a model that sits beneath the felt experience of all of this, a formal architecture that sleep researchers use to make sense of why you feel sleepy when you do, and why some nights the descent comes easily and others it seems to refuse you entirely. Alexander Borbély proposed it in 1982, and it remains one of the most useful frames in all of sleep science. He called it the two-process model, and its elegance is the kind that makes you wonder, once you encounter it, how you ever thought about sleep without it. The first process he called Process S. The S stands for sleep pressure, the homeostatic drive, the body's way of keeping a running account of how long you have been awake. From the moment your eyes opened this morning, a chemical called adenosine began to accumulate in your brain. Adenosine is a byproduct of neural energy use, a kind of metabolic exhaust produced simply by the act of thinking, perceiving, deciding, remembering. Every hour of wakefulness adds to the load. By mid-afternoon, it has built into the weight you feel behind your eyes, the slight thickening of thought, the way effort costs a little more than it did at 9 in the morning. By evening, that pressure is considerable. The brain is, in a quiet chemical sense, heavy with the day. Caffeine does not give you energy. What it does is block adenosine receptors, the sites where adenosine binds and delivers its sleepiness signal. Caffeine fits into the same locks like a key that enters but does not turn, and so adenosine accumulates behind it, waiting. When the caffeine eventually clears, the adenosine rushes in all at once, which is why a poorly timed cup of coffee can leave you more suddenly exhausted than if you had never had it. You were not more awake. You were only delaying a conversation your brain needed to have with itself. The second process Borbély called Process C. The C stands for circadian, the roughly 24-hour biological clock that runs continuously inside every cell of your body, but is orchestrated at the level of the brain by a small paired cluster of neurons sitting just above where the optic nerves cross. This is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, and it is, in most respects, the most important clock you will never see. It tracks the rhythm of light and dark, cues the release of hormones, sets the timing of temperature changes, and, crucially, generates an alerting signal that pushes back against the accumulating sleepiness of process S throughout the day. What this means is that you are not simply getting sleepier as the day goes on, you are in a continuous negotiation. Process S is pressing for sleep. Process C is holding it at bay with an active, wake-promoting signal. In the late afternoon, the circadian alerting actually peaks. Many people feel a second wind around 5 or 6 in the evening, not because they have rested, but because the clock is pushing hard against the pressure. And then, as the evening deepens, the circadian signal begins to withdraw. It steps back. The alerting subsides. And the sleep pressure, which has been building all day, no longer meets the same resistance. The gate, as researchers call it, opens. This is the sleep gate, not a mechanism but a moment, or rather a window, in which the balance tips and the descent becomes possible. It is why going to bed an hour before your natural gate arrives can feel like lying in the dark, thinking about everything you forgot to do, while going to bed an hour after it has opened can feel almost immediate. The darkness pulling you down before you have finished your next thought. You are not in full control of the gate. You can influence it, advance it, or delay it by an hour or two with light and warmth and timing. But it opens on its own schedule, and the clearest thing you can do on a hard night is to trust that it is coming. About 2 hours before that gate opens, something else begins. The pineal gland, a small structure shaped roughly like a pine cone sitting deep in the center of your brain, which is where it gets its name, begins to release melatonin into the bloodstream. This moment has a formal name. Researchers call it the DLMO, the dim light melatonin onset, and it is one of the most precisely measurable events in the entire sleep-wake cycle. Scientists have used it as a biomarker for decades. In the laboratories of Josephine Arendt, Charles Czeisler, Alfred Louis, because it is reliable enough to serve as a kind of internal timestamp for where a person is in their circadian day. Melatonin is not a sedative. This is worth sitting with for a moment because the popular understanding tends to reach for melatonin as though it were a sleeping pill, a chemical that imposes unconsciousness. It does not. It is a signal. It is the body's way of announcing to every cell and system that it is now biological night. The light-sensitive cells in your retina stop reporting daylight to the SCN, and the SCN releases the pineal gland from suppression and lets the melatonin flow. The melatonin in turn quiets the circadian alerting signal. It does not push you towards sleep so much as it steps aside and allows the accumulated adenosine to do what it has been waiting all day to do. It is a clock face, not a sedative. The hormone of darkness, telling the body what time it is in the only language the body reliably understands. And somewhere in the neighborhood of all of this, the melatonin rising, the adenosine pressing, the circadian gates swinging open, you turn out the light and settle into the dark and begin, without choosing to, the long, slow, gradient descent. The first thing that changes is the brain's electrical signature. During the hours of full wakefulness, the dominant rhythm of the cortex runs fast and varied. Neurons fire in quick, relatively desynchronized patterns, different regions chattering at different speeds, the whole system humming with a kind of productive noise. What we measure as beta waves, oscillations in the range of 13 to 30 cycles per second, is the signature of an engaged brain. Active thought, problem-solving, anxiety, concentration, these all produce the fast, irregular, high-frequency activity that looks on an EEG like a densely packed scrawl. When you close your eyes and begin to genuinely rest, something shifts. The cortex, no longer receiving the constant input of vision, begins to settle into a slower, more regular rhythm. Alpha waves emerge, 8 to 12 cycles per second, a gentle, rolling electrical cadence that researchers have associated with relaxed but still awake minds. If you have ever closed your eyes on a long train journey and felt that pleasant, slightly floating state where thoughts slow but have not yet become strange, you have been in alpha. It is the antechamber. And then, if the gate is open and the conditions are right, the alpha begins to thin. Its proportion drops below half of what the EEG is recording, and what moves in to replace it is theta, 4 to 7 cycles per second, slower and deeper, the electrical signature of the very edge of sleep. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has formally defined this threshold, the crossing from relaxed wakefulness into N1, the first stage of non-REM sleep, as the point at which alpha activity falls below 50% of a given recording epoch and theta takes its place. What is actually happening in the brain as this shift occurs is a process of increasing synchronization. During waking, neurons are largely doing their own things, responding to their particular inputs, firing at their particular rates, contributing to the overall hum without marching in step. The descent into sleep is, in part, the process of those millions of neurons beginning to fall into rhythm with each other, the chaotic crowd beginning gradually to chant. Slowly, in widening pools across the cortex, the fast, independent firing gives way to the slower, coordinated wave. It is one of the most beautiful things that happens inside a human brain, and it happens every night without your awareness, while you are already starting to lose track of where your thoughts were going. Sitting at the center of this transition is the thalamus. Most people, when they think of the brain, do not think of the thalamus first. It does not have the cultural glamour of the prefrontal cortex or the hippocampus, but at the moment of sleep onset, it is arguably the most important structure in the entire nervous system. The thalamus is the brain's relay station, a pair of egg-shaped nuclei deep in the center of the brain, through which almost all sensory information must pass on its way to the cortex. During waking, it operates in what researchers call tonic mode, faithful relay. A sound enters your ear, and the auditory signal travels up through the thalamus to the auditory cortex in a continuous, reliable stream. A light, a touch, a smell, all of it passing through the thalamus without being distorted or suppressed, the relay station doing its job of keeping the cortex connected to the outside world. As sleep approaches, the thalamus begins to change modes. It shifts from tonic to burst mode, and the difference is profound. In burst mode, the thalamic relay breaks down. Incoming sensory signals are met not with faithful transmission, but with a kind of interference, a gating that progressively disconnects the cortex from the continuous stream of the outside world. This is the thalamic gate closing. The sounds in the room become first distant, then irrelevant, then inaudible, not because they have stopped, but because the relay station has stopped relaying them. The curtain, as it were, comes down between your cortex and the world beyond your skull. This is why the last minutes before sleep feel like a withdrawal. The room grows quieter without growing quieter. Your partner's voice, if they are still speaking, becomes a murmur, and then a sound without language, and then nothing. The sensation of the blanket, which was clearly present a few minutes ago, becomes uncertain, diffuse, a memory of sensation more than sensation itself. You are not losing your senses. You are losing your thalamus's willingness to carry them forward. At the same time, the body is completing its own descent. The slow rolling eye movements have already begun, where waking eyes dart and fix and dart again, busy, purposeful, tracking. The eyes of early sleep onset drift in long, slow arcs beneath closed lids, a movement so characteristic that it has a formal name, SEM's slow eye movements, and it is one of the signals that drowsiness detection systems in vehicles use to identify a driver crossing into N1 without knowing it. The eye movements are going nowhere. They are simply rolling, unhurried, like something settling in water. The muscles are loosening. An electromyogram, a device that measures electrical activity in the muscles, would show a progressive decline in tone across the body as sleep onset approaches. The subtle, continuous micro-work that muscles do even during rest, holding posture and readiness, and the general condition of a body that might need to move, begins to cease. The jaw softens, the shoulders drop. The hands unclench in some last fraction of tension that you were not aware you were carrying. It is a release that is happening beneath the level of your intention. The heart slows, breathing deepens and then slows as well, settling into the longer, more regular rhythm of early sleep. The sympathetic nervous system, the branch that governs the alert, reactive, ready-for-threat mode of the body, withdraws its influence, and the parasympathetic system rises in its place. Rest and digest replacing fight or flight. The body's chemistry shifting toward repair, toward conservation, toward the long, patient work of recovery that sleep was always for. And heart rate variability, which is measurable and shifts before the EEG even records its first theta wave, begins to carry the signature of this parasympathetic rise, a sign that the body has, in some sense, already decided to sleep before the brain's electrical record has confirmed it. Researchers who study sleep latency, the time it takes from lying down to that first confirmed moment of stage N1, have found that healthy adults under normal circumstances take somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes to reach it. This is the work of Mary Carskadden and William Dement, whose foundational studies on sleep onset gave us the norms we still use, 10 to 20 minutes. That is the ordinary, healthy range. Less than 5 minutes, and the speed itself is a signal of debt. The system so pressured by accumulated adenosine that it collapses into sleep almost on contact with darkness. More than 20 or 30 minutes, and something is interfering with the descent. A mind still running fast, a body whose thermal signals are confused, a circadian rhythm that has been pushed late by light. There is also in these norms a curious and humbling detail. When researchers wake people who have just entered N1 and ask whether they were asleep, a significant portion of them say no. They insist sincerely that they were still awake, still thinking, still present. They were not. The EEG says otherwise. But from the inside, the experience of early sleep onset is so continuous with late wakefulness, the thread of consciousness so unbroken seeming even as it changes, that the crossing goes unremarked by the very mind that is crossing it. You slip through a doorway and do not notice the door. Take a slow breath here, not because there is anything to understand right now, but because the understanding has already happened in some quieter part of you. The body has been listening to all of this the way it listens to a river. not with effort, not with analysis, but with a slow cellular recognition. Process S is still doing its work. The SCN has stepped back. The melatonin is already doing what it knows how to do. The thalamus is already beginning, in whatever degree tonight allows, to close its curtain. You do not need to help this along. You do not need to monitor it or measure it or guide it. Notice the breath coming and going with less weight than before. Notice whether the room has grown quieter at the edges, not because anything has changed, but because the relay is already beginning its gentle withdrawal. Notice, if you can, the soft heaviness of your eyelids, not the effort of keeping them closed, but the simple absence of any desire to open them. That theta is already looking for you somewhere just below where your thoughts are still forming. And we will go toward it together. And somewhere in that gentling, the body does something that surprises almost everyone the first time they really notice it. It twitches. Not from anxiety, not from startlement, not from anything you did or failed to do, just a single involuntary contraction, whole limb or the whole body sometimes gone in less than a second. And then the room comes back, and you are awake again, heart perhaps slightly quickened, wondering what just happened. This is the hypnic jerk. Some people call it a sleep start. Neurologists call it a myoclonic jerk, which simply means an involuntary muscular contraction, the same family of movement as a hiccup, belonging to that class of things the body does without asking permission. And surveys suggest that somewhere between 60 and 70% of people experience them regularly. So if you have felt this, you are not unusual, you are not broken, you are in fact quite precisely normal. A normal body doing a normal thing at a normal threshold and simply not knowing quite what to make of it. Let us stay with the jerk for a moment, because what is happening beneath it is stranger and more interesting than most people realize. As you descend towards sleep, you have felt the muscles beginning to let go. We talked about this earlier. The progressive release of muscle tone that the body needs in order to enter sleep properly. The limbs grow heavy. The jaw softens. The small muscles around the eyes give up their habitual readiness. This is not something you do deliberately. It is something that happens to you, a slow, physiological yielding that is part of the architecture of the descent, as automatic as the cooling of the core, as reliable as the rise of melatonin into the blood. But here is what seems to happen, sometimes, at the edge of that yielding. The brain, or more precisely a particular set of brain systems that have been responsible all day for keeping you upright, alert, and oriented in space, systems that monitor the body's position and readiness with continuous low-level vigilance. These systems notice the sudden relaxation of the muscles, and they make, if we can call it this, a kind of mistake. Not a pathological mistake, a natural one, a very old one. The rapid release of muscular tension is an unusual event during normal waking life. It resembles, in a rough physiological sense, what might happen if the body was suddenly falling, and so the brain, working on instinct that runs far below the level of conscious thought, may fire a reflex, a catching reflex, a jerk to regain balance, to grab something, to stop a fall that is not happening. The body lurches back toward the world, and you wake up. Now, and this is important to say clearly, this explanation, the relaxation misread hypothesis, is a leading account. It is widely cited, it has a real logic to it, and it fits the experience neatly. But it is a hypothesis, not a settled fact. The neuroscience of the hypnic jerk is genuinely not fully resolved. There is also a competing account that focuses not on the relaxation itself, but on the unstable transition between the competing systems, the wake-promoting circuits and the sleep-promoting circuits that are, during those minutes, effectively fighting for control of the same brain. That competition may produce a brief motor discharge, a kind of electrical spillover, at the moment the balance tips. Whether it is the relaxation misread, the competitive transition, or some combination that varies between people and moments, this remains an honest area of uncertainty. What you may have heard, the popular explanation, that the hypnic jerk is an ancient reflex inherited from primate ancestors who slept in trees, a remnant of the need to catch yourself from falling out of branches. This story is appealing, it is vivid, and it feels satisfying in the way that evolutionary explanations often do. But it is, as best as current science can say, an unproven speculation, a just-so story. There is no direct evidence that this is what the reflex is for, or even that it has a specific, evolved purpose at all. So hold it lightly as a good story, but not as the explanation. The honest answer is that we do not know exactly why this happens, only that it is benign, that it is common, and that it tends to occur precisely at the threshold you are now approaching, the moment the muscles let go enough to trigger something. The falling sensation that often accompanies the jerk is worth noting on its own. Many people report not just the twitch, but a vivid, sudden image, the sensation of a step missed at the bottom of a staircase or a sidewalk curb that wasn't there, or simply the pure kinesthetic feeling of dropping into nothing before the body snaps back. The brain, even as it begins to lose its editorial control, is still in the business of making sense of experience. It constructs a narrative around the physical event after the fact, almost instantaneously. The body lurches, the mind writes a dream of falling to explain it. It is authoring, right there at the edge of sleep, the first rough draft of a story. There are things that make the hypnic jerk more frequent or more violent on any given night. Caffeine, taken late in the day, keeps the nervous system in a heightened state that makes the descent more turbulent. The transition between wake and sleep becomes more abrupt, the swing wider, the jerk more likely and more startling. Intense exercise late in the evening has a similar effect, not because exercise is harmful in itself, but because it elevates the body's arousal in ways that take several hours to fully subside, so that when sleep onset finally arrives, it arrives against a background of still elevated tension. Stress does the same. A day of accumulated anxiety sits in the muscles long after the mind has decided it wants to rest, and the relaxation that sleep demands has to overcome a greater resistance, producing a larger release, and so a more dramatic jerk. Sleep deprivation itself tends to increase them. The deeper the sleep pressure that is built through Process S, the more abruptly the transition is forced, and the more vigorously the system fires. None of these triggers are permanent. They are conditions, not conclusions, and knowing them is simply a way of understanding what the body is doing, not a reason to add them to a list of things to worry about at night. Worry, after all, is itself one of the conditions. Take a breath. Let the breath come slowly without direction. In and then out, and then a small pause before the next one comes, the way breath naturally settles when nothing is being demanded of it. The jerk, when it comes, is a visitor. It arrives at the threshold and then it leaves. It does not mean the descent has failed. Often, in the surveys, people report that the jerk is followed by a rapid return to the edge, the muscles letting go again almost immediately, the body willing to try once more. The system is not discouraged, it knows what it is moving toward, and it moves toward it again. Now let us follow what is happening inside the brain itself during these minutes, because there is something happening that the word falling asleep almost entirely obscures. Something that begins to explain why the last few minutes before sleep feel so strange, so fragmented, so impossible to hold on to. The brain does not fall asleep all at once. This is one of the most important things modern sleep research has clarified, and it is one of the least intuitive. We speak of wakefulness and sleep as if they are two conditions that apply uniformly to the brain, as if there is a switch somewhere, and the switch governs everything simultaneously, but the research tells a different story. Different regions of the cortex, the outer layer of the brain where most of our conscious processing happens, begin to enter sleep-like states at slightly different times. Some areas slow down first, others follow. The cortex and the thalamus, that relay station we talked about earlier, can begin their descent in sequence rather than in perfect synchrony. Sensory regions and heteromodal regions, the parts of the brain that deal with different kinds of information, do not all dim their lights at exactly the same moment. This phenomenon has a name in the research: local sleep, the brain falling asleep in pieces, region by region, rather than all at once. The work of Maurizio Magnin and colleagues, published in 2010, examined the electrical activity of individual brain regions during the transition to sleep and found that different areas entered sleep states at detectably different times, and the research of Yuval Nir and Giulio Tononi has continued to develop the picture of how this local, piecemeal deactivation unfolds. The picture that emerges is of a brain not switching off but ebbing, parts of it going quiet while other parts continue briefly to hold the day's light. This explains something about the felt quality of those last minutes. The experience of falling asleep is so strange precisely because different parts of the processing apparatus are at different stages of the descent simultaneously. Some part of you is already in the altered territory, already receiving the strange fragmentary images of the hypnagogic state, while another part is still capable of something like thought. Some part is already losing its grip on the coherent narrative of the self, while another is still barely aware that it is lying in a bed in a room. The fragmentation is real. The strangeness is not noise in the signal. It is the signal, a direct experience of a brain that is powering down in the irregular, gradual, piece-by-piece way that it actually powers down, not the instantaneous transition that our language implies. And because the descent is uneven, there is a zone, potentially quite wide, in which you are neither fully awake nor fully asleep, but genuinely somewhere between. A region that has its own character, its own kind of experience, its own rules. The hypnagogic state is not a brief flicker at the edge of sleep. For many people, it is a sustained interval of genuine strangeness, lasting minutes, sometimes longer, in which the brain is doing something genuinely different from what it does in either full wakefulness or established sleep. You are in that zone now, or close to it. The thoughts that may have been forming while you listened have probably begun to loosen their shape. A sentence started in your mind may not have found its ending. An image may have appeared from nowhere, unrelated to what was being said, and dissolved again before you quite registered it. This is not your attention failing. This is local sleep beginning its gentle, uneven work. There is something else that happens in this zone that most people never know about, even though they experience it, sometimes daily, without recognizing what they are seeing. A microsleep. A microsleep is a very brief intrusion of stage N1 into what appears to be wakefulness. The duration can be as short as a single second, as long as 15 seconds. The person experiencing it typically does not know it is happening. Their eyes may be open, they may appear to any outside observer to be awake, but the EEG shows a clear, unmistakable signal of N1, the alpha waves, gone, replaced by the theta rhythm that marks the crossing of the threshold. And then, as abruptly as it arrived, it passes, and the brain returns to something closer to wakefulness. The person who has just experienced a microsleep almost never reports it. They do not say, "I was briefly not here." They continue their conversation, their driving, their meeting, without any subjective sense of interruption. This is how seamless the boundary is, how thoroughly the experience of crossing it can erase itself. Microsleeps are more common in people who are sleep-deprived, as you would expect. The homeostatic pressure of process S pressing so urgently against the alerting signal of the circadian clock that sleep breaks through in small surges even when the person is trying to remain awake. But they are not limited to the severely deprived. They can occur in the moderately tired, in anyone navigating the afternoon circadian dip, in anyone sitting still in a warm room in the quiet hours. This is why they have become important in safety research, particularly in the study of driver fatigue. The systems designed to detect drowsy driving, the camera-based, sensor-equipped attention monitors in modern vehicles, are trained in significant part to recognize the signatures of N1 encroaching on apparent wakefulness, the slowing of blink rate, the lengthening of the blink itself, the emergence of the slow rolling eye movements that we discussed earlier, the subtle sag of the head. These are the physical signs of local sleep arriving even while the driver believes they are alert. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep is porous. It is not a wall but a membrane, and the membrane is thinner than we tend to assume. What this means, on an ordinary night, is that even before you are asleep in any established clinical sense, even before the EEG would give you the N1 designation and hold it there, you may have already been across the threshold several times in brief surges without knowing. The descent is not linear, it is more like a tide. The water advances, it retreats, it advances a little further, and each advance leaves the ground a little wetter, a little softer, a little more changed. Rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. Let it come all the way in without hurry, and then let it go all the way until the lungs are easy. Notice whether the room has grown a little more distant, not quieter exactly, not darker, but perhaps slightly further away than it was, as if the volume of everything has been turned down a fraction of a notch without your asking. This is the thalamus continuing its work. The relay is narrowing. The cortex is already beginning in pieces to soften. You do not need to stay with any particular thought right now. If one arrives, let it arrive. If it begins to change shape before it completes itself, that is fine. That is, in fact, exactly what is supposed to happen here. The thoughts are beginning to work by different rules, and we will follow those rules gently in just a moment. When you are ready, we will continue together. The threshold you are moving toward, or perhaps already touching, in the way the tide touches the sand and retreats and touches it again, has a name. It has been named and studied and written about by researchers and artists and philosophers across centuries because it is unusual enough and vivid enough and strange enough to demand attention. But before we go there, let us stay for one more breath with the idea of the porous boundary. Because there is something quietly remarkable about the fact that the moment you cross into sleep each night is a moment you can never reliably identify from the inside. You do not have a felt sense of it. You cannot watch yourself go. The crossing is not available to conscious experience in the way that, say, walking into a room is available. You do not turn around and see the door you came through. The experience of the transition is itself the transition, and the thing that would report on the crossing, the self, the witness, the continuous narrative awareness that says, I am here, I am awake, I am me, that very thing is already changing as the crossing happens. People woken from early N1, as we mentioned before, insist they were awake, and this is not self-deception in any ordinary sense. From inside the experience, there was no perceptible gap, no darkening, no felt shift. The EEG tells a different story, but the EEG is measuring something the person has no direct access to. The subjective experience of falling asleep is, for most people, the experience of not quite falling asleep, of still being present, still in some sense aware, until at some unlocatable point, they are not. This mismatch between what the brain is objectively doing and what the mind subjectively reports is one of the more philosophically interesting features of sleep onset. It suggests that the systems responsible for monitoring and reporting on our own experience, for saying from inside what is happening, those systems are themselves caught up in the descent. They do not float above it watching, they go under too, and they go under without narrating the going. And the going is already beginning in whatever degree tonight allows, in the gentle, uneven way that local sleep works. Some part of you already below the surface, some part still at the edge of the water, the two coexisting in that fragmented, layered, quietly extraordinary way that the last minutes before sleep always are, and that we almost never pay any attention to because we are, almost always, already gone before we can. The slow, rolling eye movements, if they have begun behind your closed lids, are doing their quiet work. They are the eye's way of releasing the project of the day, releasing the need to track, to find, to attend. The eyes in wakefulness are restless instruments darting with micro-saccades, oriented always towards something, always ready to shift toward motion or change. In the descent, they let that go. They move, still but slowly, in wide, gentle arcs, not tracking anything, not looking for anything, simply moving the way water moves when the current has eased. Your heart rate, if you could measure it, has been slowing, not dramatically, not in a way you would necessarily notice from inside, but the shift is real and measurable. The sympathetic nervous system, which all day has been maintaining the state of readiness that waking life requires, drawing back. The parasympathetic tone rising in its place. The body moving from the mode of action into the mode of restoration, from engagement into repair. This shift, too, is happening in the heart rate variability, the tiny variations in the interval between heartbeats. In wakefulness, and especially in states of stress or alertness, the heart beats with a certain regularity, responsive to the moment's demands. In the parasympathetic rise of the sleep onset descent, the variability changes in characteristic ways that researchers can read, the way the body reads a change in weather. The heart is settling, the blood pressure follows, the breath is finding its own pace without the nervous system's constant supervision. The whole apparatus of daily life is releasing its grip on the moment. And somewhere in that release, in the loosening of the body's daytime vigilance and the slowing of the brain's waking rhythms, something begins to appear. Something that has been waiting at the edge of the sensory field, quiet while the day was loud, invisible while the prefrontal cortex was running its sharp editorial eye over every piece of incoming information. Something strange, something wonderful, something your brain has been generating every single night for your entire life, and that most people have never been told has a name. Let us go toward it slowly, in the way this whole night has been going, not rushing, not forcing, simply following the path the body already knows. The path leads here to the hypnagogic state. Alfred Maury, a 19th century French scholar, gave it this name, hypnagogic, from the Greek for sleep and for leading, the state that leads toward sleep. Maury studied his own experiences at the threshold with the careful attention of a naturalist, noting down what he found there with the same methodical curiosity he brought to the study of folklore and dreams. What he found was not nothing, not a blank, not the absence of experience that people tend to assume exists between wakefulness and sleep. What he found was a world, and what he named we have been approaching all night. The hypnagogic state is what lives in the space we have been slowly entering, the space after the thalamus has begun its closing of the gate, after the prefrontal cortex has softened its vigilance, after the slow rolling eye movements have replaced the darting precision of wakefulness, after the theta rhythm has begun to emerge from beneath the alpha, after the body has begun its warmth and cooling work, and the muscles have started to release their held tension. In that space, the brain does not go quiet. It does not wait patiently for sleep to arrive. It begins, in its own unhurried and peculiar way, to generate. And what it generates is unlike anything that happens in the rest of the day. We will go there together in a moment. And the way we will go is exactly the way you go every night, gradually, without force, following the thread of what is already happening in the body and the brain, as this particular night does what all nights do. But stay here for just a breath more at the edge of what we have just walked through. You have been following the body's descent from something very close to wakefulness, through the falling and the catching, through the piecemeal darkening of the cortex, through the micro-sleeps and the porous membrane, through the thalamocortical narrowing and the parasympathetic settling of the heart. All of that has been happening. Some portion of it has been happening in you right now, as the words have come and the room has remained the same room, but grown somehow more quiet at the edges. The hypnic jerk, if it came tonight, has already come and gone. The body is past that threshold now, or very nearly. The muscles are settling again into the weight of the mattress, the small adjustments of position that wakefulness makes constantly, the tiny shifts of pressure that the awake body manages automatically, staying comfortable, staying ready. Those adjustments have grown slower, less frequent, less insistent. The breath is the easiest way to notice where you are, not by analyzing it, not by asking it to do something different, simply by feeling it, in through the nose or the mouth, whichever way it has chosen for tonight. A small pause at the top, and then the slow release, and then a slightly longer pause at the bottom before the next one comes. This pause at the bottom of the breath, longer than you might expect without discomfort, is itself a sign of the parasympathetic system doing what it does when the body is safe and settling. The breath knows, take a slow breath, not because you need to, because the breath is already slow and meeting it there is enough. And now let us follow it, into the strange country that lives just below here, into the place that Alfred Maury named, and that Thomas Edison sought, and that Salvador Dali held his key above, and that amnesiac patients returned to in their sleep even when they could not remember why. Into the hypnagogic state and everything that waits there, the phosphine lights and the floating faces, the names called from nowhere, the impossible images that accept their own impossibility without question, the doorway through which something that Edison called creativity and scientists at the Paris Brain Institute now call insight, passes 3 times more easily than it does through the ordinary waking mind. That doorway is just ahead. You are already at the threshold, and the next thing we will do together is simply walk through it. There is a moment just past the threshold when the body makes a sudden and involuntary decision. You may have felt it tonight or on other nights. You are almost there. The breath has slowed, the thoughts have loosened, the body has grown heavy, and then, in a single, sharp instant, something contracts. An arm, a leg, the whole torso. A jolt that arrives from nowhere and returns you, blinking, to the ceiling. Your heart is moving a little faster than it was. The images that were beginning to form have scattered like birds. This is the hypnic jerk, also called a sleep start or a hypnagogic jerk, or in the drier language of medicine, a myoclonic jerk, a brief, benign, involuntary contraction of the muscles occurring at the edge of sleep. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of people experience them. If you do, you are in unremarkable company. What accompanies the jolt is often something stranger than the jolt itself. A vivid and convincing sensation of falling, a missed step, the edge of a curb or a stair that was not there, or simply the opening of space beneath you. And then the reflex fires and you are back. And the falling, which was never real, is already gone. Where does it come from? The honest answer is that no one is entirely certain, which is itself worth noting. that a thing experienced by the majority of human beings on many of the nights of their lives remains not fully explained. The leading hypothesis, the one most widely discussed in sleep medicine, goes something like this. As the muscles relax in the approach to sleep, the degree of relaxation is rapid enough that something in the brain's vigilance systems, something old and not much given to reasoning, reads the sudden release of muscle tone as a signal that the body is falling. And so it fires, a startle reflex, a catching movement, a command sent to muscles to arrest a fall that was never happening. The body obeys. And the brain, which is already beginning to generate imagery rather than to perceive the world accurately, constructs around that physical jolt a brief narrative, a missed step, a stumble, the dropping away of ground, because that is what the jolt would mean if it had happened while you were standing upright in the waking world. That is the leading hypothesis. It is plausible, it is widely cited, and it is at present precisely a hypothesis, not a confirmed mechanism. The architecture of the transition is complicated enough that the jerk may arise from more than one source, including the mild competition between the systems that promote waking and the systems that promote sleep, as that competition briefly destabilizes the motor pathways. What is known is the jerk itself, the frequency, the felt experience. The why remains unsettled territory, and it is more honest to say so than to offer a clean story that the evidence does not yet support. There is one story worth gently setting aside. You may have encountered it, the idea that the hypnic jerk is a relic of our evolutionary past as tree-sleeping primates, a reflex shaped by ancestors who needed to grip a branch as they drifted off, and who would otherwise have fallen. It is an appealing story. It has a pleasant internal logic. But it is, as sleep researchers note when pressed, an evolutionary just-so hypothesis, unverified, undemonstrated, categorized by those who work in this field as speculation rather than established fact. The tree ancestor story is worth knowing as a story. It is not worth holding as an explanation. What is documented is what makes the jerk more likely on a given night. Caffeine, particularly taken later in the day, increases their frequency. Intense physical exercise close to sleep, sleep deprivation, and stress, the ongoing background kind that does not announce itself but keeps the nervous system at a slightly elevated level of readiness even when you are lying down and trying to let go. On the nights when it feels hardest to cross the threshold, when the jolt comes again and again and returns you again and again to the surface, these are often the nights when one or more of those factors is present. The jerk is, in this sense, a kind of readout, a sign of how much the system is still braced. Take a slow breath, and if the jolt comes tonight, you can receive it as information rather than as failure. The body is learning, again, that it is safe to release. It may need more than one reassurance. Now, below the level of the jolt, something else is happening, and it has been happening for some time. Something quieter and more gradual, and in some ways more remarkable. Your brain is not falling asleep all at once. This is one of the things that sleep research in the last 2 decades has made increasingly clear. The descent into sleep is not a simultaneous event, a general switch thrown that darkens every room at once. It is more like a house at the end of a long evening. The lights going out in one room, then another, the kitchen last, or the hallway, the sequence varying slightly from night to night. Research by Magnin and colleagues, published in 2010 and extended by the work of Yuval Nir and Giulio Tononi, showed that different cortical regions transition into sleep-like states at different moments. Some areas of the brain may be generating the slow, synchronized rhythms of early sleep, while others are still, briefly, in a state closer to waking. This is what is called local sleep, and it is part of the reason that the last minutes before full sleep onset have the quality they have, that fragmentary, loosely connected, slightly incoherent feeling where a thought begins in one register and ends in another, where the logic that was holding something together quietly releases its grip mid-sentence, where an image arrives that belongs to no story you can identify and is gone before you can examine it. Your brain, in these minutes, is a partially darkened house, and you are moving through it. Some rooms are already dim and quiet. Others are still receiving the last of their signals from the outside world, still processing, still generating, but with less coordination than before, less integration, less of the binding that normally holds experience into a continuous and coherent whole. This is also why the boundary between waking and sleep, when examined from the outside, turns out to be far more porous than it appears from the inside. The electroencephalograph, the instrument that reads the brain's electrical rhythms, can detect the shift into N1, the first stage of sleep, when alpha activity begins to drop below half of what the scoring system observes in a given epoch, replaced by the slower, less rhythmic patterns of theta waves moving at between 4 and 7 cycles per second. But the person lying in the bed, if woken in these early moments and asked whether they were asleep, will frequently say no. They will say they were still thinking, still aware. They will not have the felt experience of having crossed a line, even though by the measure of the machine, they had. This is sometimes called sleep state misperception at the micro level. Not a disorder, simply a feature of the boundary. The felt sense of being awake persists past the moment the brain has technically begun to sleep. The self, which normally monitors its own experience, does not receive a notification. There is no felt click. The transition, when it finally comes, will not be remembered, because the systems that would need to be active to register the crossing are themselves in the process of going offline. There are people who cross this boundary in the middle of other activities, a driver on a familiar road, mildly sleep-deprived, whose eyes remain open, but whose brain, for a period of 1 second, or 5 seconds, or 15, has slipped into a state indistinguishable on the EEG from early N1. These are micro-sleeps, brief intrusions of sleep into wakefulness that the person experiencing them is typically unaware of, in exactly the same way you are unaware of having crossed into N1 until someone wakes you and asks. In a vehicle, this porousness of the wake-sleep boundary is why drowsiness detection systems were designed to read blink rate and the slow rolling eye movements that begin to appear as the eyelids grow heavy. The eyes, before the rest, begin to tell the truth. In you tonight, the same rolling movements may already have started. The darting, micro-adjusting eyes of wakefulness, which moved continuously even in the dark, are growing slower. The blinks are longer. The intervals between them stretch. Take a slow breath. Notice, if there is anything to notice, the quality of the thoughts moving through you right now. Whether they have the clear, directed quality of purposeful thinking, or whether they have begun to loosen. Whether something has arrived in the mind recently that surprised you, an image or a name, or the beginning of a scene that had no clear origin. These small arrivals are not disruptions, they are information. They are the brain beginning to generate from the inside rather than receive from the outside the first signs of the shift that is already underway. And this is the territory we arrive at now. The final stage of the descent, the place that has a name, though most people will go through it thousands of times in a life without ever learning it. Alfred Maury, a 19th century French scholar who combined the habits of a careful scientist with the curiosity of someone who genuinely delighted in the stranger corners of experience, spent years paying attention to what happened in his own mind as he fell asleep. He was systematic about it, keeping notes, logging the images, the sounds, the sensations. And in 1848 he gave this in-between state a name that has stayed with us ever since. He called it hypnagogy, which we now write in English as hypnagogia. The word is built from the Greek, hypnos, sleep, and agogos, leading into. A leading into sleep, a threshold, not a destination. The reverse of it, the same blurred, transitional state encountered on waking, the territory you move through coming back, has a different name. Hypnopompic, from Pompeii, ascending away. A being sent back from sleep into the world. Both are normal, both are documented, both are reported by the majority of people, which means that nearly everyone in a given room has been through this territory tonight or will be, and most of them could not have named it or described it in any precise way because it occupies that peculiar category of human experience that is real, universal, and almost entirely ignored. What happens there is stranger than most people expect. The visual cortex, the large sweep of neural tissue at the back of your head that ordinarily processes what your eyes report, does not simply go quiet when the lights go off and the eyes close. It idles, and when it idles, it begins to generate. Not faithfully the way it generates when it is receiving clear information from the world, but loosely the way a fire generates sparks, not aimed at anything, not controlled, just a consequence of the ongoing chemistry of what the visual cortex is. The result, for many people, is phosphonies, lights, simple colors or shapes that appear on the inside of the closed eyelids with no source in the room. And then, as the state deepens, something more structured, geometric patterns that shift and repeat, grids and spirals and tessellations that rearrange themselves slowly, that have a quality of being watched from very close, as if the eye has become enormous, and what it sees is intricate and small. These patterns are not symbolic, they are not messages. They are the visual cortex running on its own, processing without input, producing form from the background noise of its own electrical life. Many people have seen them without knowing what they were. You may have seen them tonight already, just before starting to read, or just after, in an interval you don't quite remember. Beyond the geometric patterns, the state can offer other things, a face appearing clearly against a dark field, not necessarily a face you know, sometimes a stranger, detailed and specific, present for a moment and then gone. A landscape glimpsed as if from a moving vehicle, a hillside, a street, a room in a building you have never entered, a fragment of conversation. A sentence spoken clearly in a voice that is not yours, carrying a logic that seemed complete and then evaporated the moment you tried to follow it. Your own name, called from a middle distance. Not in any voice you can identify, but clearly, unmistakably, yours, spoken as if by someone who needed your attention. These auditory phenomena are well documented. Hearing your name at the edge of sleep is one of the most commonly reported hypnagogic experiences, and there is a particular texture to it. Not alarming, usually, but present enough to jolt you slightly back, to make you open your eyes or hold your breath and wonder if someone was in the room. Nobody was. The sound came from inside, generated by the same machinery that makes dreams, running a few steps ahead of the actual moment of sleep. There is a condition, benign and far more common than its alarming name suggests, called exploding head syndrome. It has nothing to do with pain, nothing to do with anything physically dangerous. It is a hypnagogic auditory phenomenon in which, at the moment of falling asleep or waking, a person hears a sudden, extremely loud sound, a crash, a bang, a thunderclap, an explosion that has no external source and causes no harm whatsoever. People who experience it for the first time are often frightened, believing something has happened in the house or outside the window. Sleep medicine has documented it thoroughly. It is the auditory cortex doing what the visual cortex does with phosphenies, generating from its own resources briefly and dramatically without any corresponding event in the world. There is also, for some people and on some nights, a sensed presence. Not visual, not auditory, it's something harder to describe. The quality of not being alone in the room, even when alone. A weight to the air in a particular direction. The feeling that someone is nearby, attending to you, though nothing moves and no sound comes. This too is a hypnagogic experience, documented in surveys of sleep phenomena, arising from the same loosening of the normal rules of perception that makes the threshold state so peculiar. The brain, beginning to generate internally, can generate not just images and sounds, but the felt sense of another person. The kind of background social processing that runs beneath ordinary waking, momentarily untethered and floating free. All of this, the phosphonies, the faces, the spoken name, the sensed presence, the imaginary crash, is the territory you enter in the minutes before sleep. And it is about to get more interesting because something specific is happening in the brain to allow all of it. The part of you that would normally object, that would say, wait, that isn't right, or where did that come from, or that makes no sense, has started to go quiet. And it goes quiet before everything else. The prefrontal cortex is a structure that sits at the very front of the brain, behind the forehead, and it is associated with a cluster of capacities that are among the most distinctly human things about human cognition. Executive control, planning, impulse management, self-monitoring, reality testing, the ability to hold a thought at arm's length and evaluate whether it is accurate, logical, and consistent with how the world actually works. The inner critic, if you want to call it that. The editor, the governor, the part that says no, actually, let's think about this more carefully. As sleep approaches, the prefrontal cortex is among the first regions to reduce its activity. Not because it is unimportant, but because the brain, as it descends, is not shutting down in a single coordinated moment, not cutting power to every region at once, but doing something considerably stranger. It is falling asleep in pieces. This is what researchers mean by local sleep. Different regions of the cortex transition into sleep-like states at slightly different moments. Studies by Magnin and colleagues in 2010 and related work by researchers including Yuval Nir and the neuroscientist Giulio Tononi showed that the cortex and thalamus can deactivate in sequence. Sensory regions and regions involved in heteromodal processing, the kind of high-level, cross-referenced thinking that draws from multiple senses and cognitive domains simultaneously, transition at different moments than other areas. The brain does not fall asleep all at once, it goes in parts. What this means in practice is that during the last minutes of the descent, you have a brain in which different regions are at different stages, some still near awake, some already slipping into early N1, and the regions responsible for critical evaluation, for catching the illogical and the impossible, are among those that go first, while the regions capable of generating imagery and making associative connections across disparate concepts, those remain active or become relatively more active, precisely because the supervisory voice has stepped away. This is why hypnagogic thought feels the way it does. Why a thought that begins somewhere logical drifts without any felt discontinuity into something completely unrelated. Why an image appears that has no apparent cause. Why a conclusion is reached that, when you catch it just before sleep, one of those moments when you half rouse and try to hold on to what just passed through, seems perfectly reasonable in one mental breath and completely nonsensical in the next. The connections being made are real connections drawn by a brain that is genuinely associating across memory and experience. But the filter that would normally ask whether those connections make sense is already offline. Thought has become hyper-associative. Dreaming has begun in its early, flickering form, while consciousness is still present enough to observe it, barely. This quality, with the simultaneous presence of experience and the near absence of the self that normally evaluates experience, is sometimes called destructured consciousness, a loosening of the ordinary binding that holds a unified point of view together, and it has implications that go well beyond the strangeness of the imagery. In the year 2000, the cognitive neuroscientist Robert Stickgold and colleagues published a study in the journal Science. The study is now well known in sleep research, but what it demonstrated was striking enough to be worth dwelling on. The researchers had participants play Tetris, the falling block game, for extended periods. Then they monitored these participants as they fell asleep and woke them during the hypnagogic state to ask what they had been experiencing. The participants reported seeing Tetris blocks, falling, rotating blocks, the imagery of the game, appearing at the threshold of sleep. This is not especially surprising, and in fact the phenomenon has a name, the Tetris effect, referring to the way intensely experienced activities perseverate or replay in the hypnagogic state. What was striking in Stickgold's study was a specific subset of participants. The researchers had included people with dense anterograde amnesia, a condition in which new experiences cannot be consolidated into lasting memory. These participants could play Tetris, but they could not remember doing so. Ask them the next day whether they had played a game, and they would have no recollection. And yet, when they were woken from the hypnagogic state, they too reported the falling blocks. Not described in terms of the game, because they had no memory of the game, but the imagery was there. The visual echoes of the experience were replaying at the threshold of sleep, even in brains that had no explicit record of the experience having happened. What this showed, carefully, rigorously, was that hypnagogic imagery draws on systems partly independent of the hippocampus, the brain structure most associated with forming explicit, episodic memories. The hypnagogic mind was working with material that had been processed at a level below conscious recollection. It was running on something older, something less like a filing cabinet and more like a deep, slow geological layer, present before the surface and still active after the surface has been lost. This is the Tetris effect, not a glitch. Evidence of the depth at which experience is encoded and the depth at which the hypnagogic state operates. And this leads somewhere that, if you are still awake enough to follow it, may be the most genuinely surprising part of this whole descent. Thomas Edison, who slept relatively little and was vocal about his dismissal of sleep as largely a waste of time, a position that modern sleep science would find worth contesting, did something specific when he wanted to think. He would sit in a chair or on a cot in his laboratory, holding steel balls in his hands over a metal plate on the floor, and he would let himself drift. Let the edge of sleep approach, and at the moment when his muscles relaxed completely, when the hypnic jerk came or the hands simply opened, the balls would fall. The clatter would wake him. And what he came back from, what he carried back from that few seconds or those few minutes at the threshold, he found useful, vivid, generative. Salvador Dali did something almost identical. He called it slumber with a key. He would doze in a chair with a heavy key pinched between his thumb and forefinger, a plate balanced on his lap below. The key would fall, he would wake. And the imagery he encountered in that slipping moment, the molten, associative, logic-free imagery of the hypnagogic state, fed directly into the surrealist paintings that made him famous. The persistence of memory, its softening watches and desert distances, has the exact quality of hypnagogic vision. Real things made strange, familiar forms made fluid, the ordinary rendered dreamlike but not yet quite dream. Auguste Kekule, the 19th century chemist, described a reverie, somewhere between waking and sleep, in which he saw atoms arranging themselves into a snake and the snake curling around to bite its own tail. He woke knowing the ring structure of benzene. one of the foundational insights of organic chemistry arrived at through the hypnagogic state's willingness to combine things that the waking, logical mind would have kept separate. The anecdotes are vivid and suggestive. But anecdotes are not evidence. What made these stories scientifically interesting rather than merely charming was that the underlying mechanism, the idea that the sleep onset state genuinely enhances certain kinds of creative problem-solving, could be tested. In 2021, Delphine Oudiette and colleagues at the Paris Brain Institute published a study in the journal Science Advances. They took the Edison technique and made it rigorous. Participants were given a mathematical task that contained a hidden shortcut, a rule that, if discovered, would allow them to solve each problem far more quickly. Most participants, working through the task in normal wakefulness, did not discover the shortcut. Then the researchers used a technique to monitor sleep onset. Participants rested with their eyes closed and would wake them at different stages, if they stayed fully awake, if they drifted into N1, or if they went all the way into deeper sleep. The result was specific and striking. Participants who were woken from the N1 hypnagogic state, the twilight zone, not from full sleep, but from that threshold, were 3 times more likely to have discovered the hidden rule. Not waking rest, not deep sleep. The doorway itself. The few minutes at the threshold where the prefrontal cortex has stepped back, but consciousness has not yet fully gone. 3 times more likely to crack a problem they hadn't solved while fully awake. Edison was not wrong. He had found with steel balls and a metal plate something that a Paris laboratory with an EEG system and a carefully designed mathematical task would not formally demonstrate until more than a century after his death. The hypnagogic state is not wasted time. It is not a blurred corridor to be passed through as quickly as possible on the way to real sleep. It is a mode of cognition that the waking mind cannot access, one in which the connections between ideas are looser and more numerous, in which the prefrontal filter that keeps unlikely associations from forming has temporarily stood aside, and in which the brain does something with problems and perceptions and experiences that it simply cannot do while you are alert, directed, and in control. You pass through it every night. Tonight, if you are close, you may be in it now, or nearly. Take a slow breath, let it go all the way out. And let us go now to the deepest part of this. The part that is hardest to describe, not because the science is incomplete, though in some places it is, but because the thing being described is the very instrument doing the describing, and the instrument is in the process of shutting down. There is a network in the brain called the default mode network. The name is ungainly, but what it refers to is something you have a felt sense of already, because you have been inside it every time your mind has wandered. It is most active when you are not focused on a task, when you are daydreaming, reflecting, thinking about yourself, imagining what someone else is thinking, remembering the past, anticipating the future. It is the network of self-referential processing, the neural substrate of the inner life. Its central nodes include the medial prefrontal cortex, the region behind the center of the forehead that is involved in thinking about yourself, your values, your beliefs, your ongoing story, and the posterior cingulate cortex and the precuneus, regions at the back and inside of the brain associated with autobiographical memory, with the felt sense of a continuous self, with the experience of being a subject persisting through time. When you are awake and relaxed and your mind is wandering, these regions are active together. They are in conversation. And what that conversation produces moment to moment is the sense of being you. Not a thought about yourself, just the ambient background of selfhood, the felt continuity that makes the person who opened their eyes this morning feel like the same person who is lying here now, which feels like the same person who remembers last year and imagines next week. The default mode network is, in some important sense, the machinery of the self, the hardware on which the experience of being a continuous person runs. As sleep approaches, as N1 deepens and the brain continues its regional shutdown, the default mode network does not simply go quiet, its connectivity reorganizes. The regions that normally speak to one another in the particular pattern that produces integrated selfhood begin to decouple. The medial prefrontal cortex, already quieting as part of the broader prefrontal withdrawal, the posterior cingulate, the precuneus. The conversation that generates the self is not cut off like a phone line, but it changes, becomes fragmented. The nodes are still present, still active in some ways, but the pattern that produces a unified self, a continuous narrator, a consistent I who watches and comments and makes sense of what passes through, that pattern loosens. And what you experience as this happens, if experience is even quite the right word for something that the experiencer is increasingly not tracking, is that the watcher dims. Not the experience. The watcher. Things still happen. Images arrive. Associations form. Something continues. But the quality of there being someone to whom all of this is happening, the particular sense of me, here, now, observing all this, that quality grows thin, grows intermittent, blinks. This is what the dossier means when it says the threshold where the sense of self begins to dissolve. It is not metaphor, it is not poetic license. The neural substrate of continuous selfhood is progressively decoupling, and the felt result is a gradual loss of the vantage point from which experience is normally observed. You become less like a viewer watching a screen and more like... There is no perfect analogy because the usual analogies require a stable perspective, and it is precisely the stable perspective that is going, something like, the screen is still lit. The images are still running, but the chair is empty. And then, at some point, that you will never be able to identify precisely, because the very system that would identify it is the one going offline, you are asleep. There is a measurable phenomenon, well documented in sleep research, that captures this exact strangeness. When people are woken from early N1, the stage that the EEG shows as the beginning of sleep, many of them insist they were still awake. They say they were just thinking, just resting with their eyes closed. The EEG says sleep, they say wakefulness. This is sometimes called sleep state misperception, though in this mild momentary form it is entirely normal. It happens because the transition from aware of being awake to asleep does not feel from the inside like a transition. It feels like nothing. There is no moment of noticing the crossing. There is only the this side and then, for someone else to observe, the other. This is why you have never caught yourself falling asleep. You have felt the approach, the growing heaviness, the drifting thought, the slipping concentration. But the actual moment, the precise threshold, is invisible to the person crossing it. The surveyor cannot map the boundary while standing on it, because standing on it is precisely what changes the surveyor into someone who is no longer surveying. You are awake, observing the approach of sleep, and then you are asleep, unaware of anything, and the moment between those two things is a gap that you will never close from the inside, because closing it from the inside is what sleep is. Every night you disappear. Not completely, not all at once. The body continues, the brain continues, the vast orchestration of dreaming and slow wave repair and hormonal release and memory consolidation continues through the hours ahead. But the self, the narrator, the continuous I that has been with you through every moment of this day and every day before it, that particular thing quietly ends every night for hours, and then returns each morning as if it had never gone. You carry this disappearance so lightly, most people do. It is so familiar, so ordinary, so reliably followed by the return that the strangeness of it has worn smooth. but it is strange. The temporary dissolution of the self is the thing you do most consistently, most completely, and most trustingly every single night of your life. You close your eyes, you warm your hands and feet and cool your core. You let the adenosine win, you ride the slow chant of theta waves down through the thalamic gate. You pass through the flickering theatre of the hypnagogic state with its phosphins and falling blocks and imaginary crashes and the voice that speaks your name from inside. And then you let go of yourself. Every night. Without fear. Without ceremony. Without even noticing. Take a slow breath. Let it all the way out. Notice what has softened, if anything has. What has loosened in the quality of the thoughts still moving through you? Whether the images have any more strangeness to them than they did a while ago. Whether the sense of yourself sitting very precisely here, following a thread, has grown faintly less precise. That loosening, if you feel it, is the thing we have been talking about. The default mode network beginning to reorganize. The self-shaped pattern in the neural conversation starting to shift. You are not broken. You are not disappearing in any permanent way. You are doing what every brain in every body does every night, including tonight, including now. Let us gather before we go. We have moved tonight through a lot of territory. We have talked about warm feet and cooling cores, about the single best predictor of sleep onset being not how tired you feel, but how warm your hands and feet are becoming while your body sheds heat through the skin. We met the preoptic area of the hypothalamus where the neurons that manage heat loss and the neurons that promote sleep live side by side, as if the body had long ago decided these two things were the same project. We talked about the two process models, and about sleep pressure building all day long, carried by adenosine, and the circadian clock at the suprachiasmatic nucleus holding it back until the hour arrived. About melatonin, rising in the evening not as a sedative, but as a signal, the hormone of darkness telling the brain it is biological night. About the brain waves slowing their rhythm. From the busy, high-frequency scatter of beta through the calm, closed-eye regularity of alpha into the slower, more synchronized drift of theta. About the thalamus switching from its faithful relay of the world into a gating mode, drawing a curtain between the cortex and outside, letting the inner world take over. We talked about the twitch, the hypnic jerk that catches you at the edge and pulls you back, your brain misreading your own muscles, relaxing and firing a reflex to catch a body that was never falling, constructing the sensation of a missed step or the edge of a roof to explain the lurch after the fact. We talked about how the brain at this boundary is falling asleep in pieces, region by region, and how the last minutes before sleep feel fragmented precisely because they are different parts of you arriving at different stages at the same time, local sleep taking hold in patches. We passed through the hypnagogic state, the territory Alfred Maury named in the 19th century. We talked about the visual cortex idling and generating phosphins, geometric patterns that have no source in the room, about the face that appears and the voice that says your name, about the loud crash that is the exploding head syndrome. Harmless, startling, a momentary drama from a brain generating from its own resources. About Robert Stickgold's amnesiac Tetris players who saw the falling blocks they couldn't remember playing, proof that the hypnagogic mind is drawing from a layer of processing that runs below what we usually call memory. We talked about Edison and his steel balls and Dali and his key and what they knew without knowing the mechanism. And about the Paris Brain Institute in 2021, where Delphine Oudiette and colleagues showed rigorously and quantifiably that people woken from the N1 doorway were 3 times more likely to crack a hidden rule. That the threshold state is not lost time, but a specific mode of cognition brief and accessible and uniquely generative. Something the fully awake mind cannot reach and the deeply sleeping mind has already passed. And we talked about the self, about the default mode network, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, the precuneus, and the conversation between them that generates the felt sense of being a continuous I, about how that conversation reorganizes as sleep deepens, about the watcher dimming while experience continues, about the threshold that cannot be observed from the inside because arriving at it is what ends the observation, about the fact that every night, reliably, without ceremony, you dissolve, and every morning you return. You do not need to remember any of it, not the names, not the numbers, not the sequence. If you remember anything from tonight, let it be the simplest version, that the 90 minutes before sleep are not blank time. They are a real country with real geography, and what happens in them is stranger and richer than the ordinary story of exhaustion and unconsciousness would suggest. That your brain is doing something specific and interesting and in certain ways remarkable in the minutes before you disappear. And that the disappearance itself is not a small thing to take lightly, but something you have trusted completely every night since you were new to being alive. Let that be enough. If one image stayed, the warm hands, the falling block, the steel ball dropping to a plate in a laboratory 100 years ago, let that be the thing. One image carried lightly. The rest will do its own work in the hours ahead without any help from you. The brain waves are slowing, the thalamic gate is drawing closed. Somewhere in the preoptic hypothalamus, the warm sensitive neurons are easing the body toward its resting temperature, and the adenosine has done its patient all-day work, and the suprachiasmatic nucleus has let the gate open, and the night is doing what it has always done. You're moored safe in the sleepy harbor now. Drift off